The crystal chandelier cast elegant shadows across the marble floor of Le Chateau, one of the most exclusive restaurants in downtown Chicago. But what happened at Table 7 that evening would shake the foundation of everything the staff thought they knew about power, respect, and assumptions. The woman sitting alone wore a simple black dress and pearl earrings, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed wealth or status. But when she finally revealed who she really was, the entire restaurant would never be the same. Welcome to Voice of the Black, where we spotlight the moments that define strength and reveal the power that lies beneath the surface. Before we dive into this incredible story that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about first impressions, tell us in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe that respect should never be earned through fear, but given through humanity, hit that subscribe button and join our community that refuses to stay silent. Dr. Zara Blackwell adjusted the clasp of her pearl necklace as she stepped through the heavy glass doors of Le Chateau at exactly 7:30 p.m. on a crisp October evening. At 32 years old, she stood 5 feet 7 inches with shoulder-length natural hair styled in loose curls that framed her face perfectly. Her dark brown eyes held the quiet confidence of someone who had earned everything she had through years of dedication and hard work. She wore a simple black cocktail dress, understated but elegant, paired with modest heels and a small clutch purse. To anyone watching, she looked like exactly what she was: a professional woman treating herself to dinner at a nice restaurant after a long day at work. What they couldn't see was the exhaustion in her shoulders from a 14-hour surgery that had saved a child's life, or the satisfaction in her smile from knowing that tomorrow that child would wake up and hug their parents. Dr. Blackwell was one of the leading pediatric cardiac surgeons in the Midwest, a woman who had graduated summa cum laude from Johns Hopkins Medical School and had pioneered several life-saving surgical techniques. But tonight, she just wanted to enjoy a quiet dinner and celebrate her latest professional milestone. She had just been offered the position of Chief of Pediatric Surgery at Chicago Children's Hospital. Le Chateau was the kind of restaurant where reservations were made months in advance, where the waitstaff spoke in hushed, reverential tones, and where the average entree cost more than most people spend on groceries in a week. Zara had made her reservation 3 weeks ago, specifically requesting a table by the window so she could watch the city lights while she dined. This wasn't an impulse decision or a frivolous expense. It was a carefully planned celebration of years of hard work finally paying off. As she approached the hostess stand, Zara noticed the immediate shift in atmosphere. The blonde hostess, who couldn't have been older than 22, looked up from her reservation book with a smile that faltered the moment she saw Zara's face. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but Zara had seen that look enough times in her life to recognize it instantly. The smile became forced, the posture stiffened slightly, and the eyes did that quick up-and-down assessment that people often don't realize they're doing. "Good evening," Zara said warmly, her voice carrying professional authority she used when speaking with concerned parents in the hospital. "I have a reservation under Blackwell for 7:30. The hostess, whose name tag read Madison, flipped through her reservation book with exaggerated thoroughness, as if she couldn't possibly find a name without extensive searching. "Blackwell," she repeated slowly, running her finger down the page. "I'm not seeing that reservation in our system." Zara's eyebrows raised slightly. She had confirmed this reservation just yesterday, and she had the confirmation email on her phone. "Could you check again? It should be there for 7:30. Table for one." Madison sighed, as if Zara's very presence was inconveniencing her. "Let me check with my manager." She disappeared through a door marked "Staff Only," leaving Zara standing at the hostess stand while other patrons walked past, some glancing at her curiously. While she waited, Zara observed the restaurant's clientele. The dining room was filled with well-dressed white couples and business groups, all speaking the quiet, refined tones that expensive restaurants seem to inspire. Servers glided between tables with practiced efficiency, and everything about the atmosphere suggested old money, tradition, and exclusivity. Madison returned 5 minutes later, accompanied by a thin, sharp-featured man in his mid-40s who wore the kind of expensive suit that spoke of management-level authority. His name tag identified him as Robert Chun, assistant manager. Ms. Blackwell, he said, his tone professionally polite, but somehow managing to convey skepticism. I understand there's some confusion about your reservation. No confusion on my end, Zara replied calmly. I made a reservation 3 weeks ago, confirmed it yesterday, and I have the confirmation email, if you'd like to see it. Robert glanced at Madison, then back at Zara. I'm sure you understand that Le Chateau has very specific standards for our dining experience. We cater to a particular type of clientele. The words hung in the air like smoke, their meaning crystal clear even though nothing explicitly inappropriate had been said. Zara felt her jaw tighten slightly, but her voice remained steady. And what type of clientele would that be? Robert's smile was thin and cold. Discerning guests who appreciate fine dining and understand the expectations that come with that experience. Zara looked at him for a long moment, processing not just his words, but the entire interaction. In her years as a surgeon, she had dealt with difficult colleagues, demanding patience, and high-pressure situations that most people couldn't imagine. She had learned to remain calm under pressure, to think strategically, and to choose her battles wisely. This was clearly a battle worth choosing. I see, she said quietly. And you determined that I don't meet those expectations based on our assessment of whether you would be comfortable in our environment, Robert replied smoothly. Perhaps there's another restaurant in the area that would be more suitable for your preferences. It was masterfully done. Zara had to admit, nothing he had said could be considered legally discriminatory. He hadn't mentioned race, income, or any protected class. He had simply made it clear that she wasn't welcome without saying so directly. Behind Robert and Madison, Zara could see other diners at nearby tables beginning to notice the conversation. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious, and a few seemed to be reaching for their phones. In the age of social media, confrontations like this rarely stayed private for long. Zara reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, scrolling to the confirmation email. Here's my confirmation for tonight's reservation, she said, holding the screen where Robert could see it. As you can see, everything is in order. Robert barely glanced at the phone. I'm afraid that doesn't matter. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone. For what reason? We don't need to provide a reason. The conversation was attracting more attention now. A couple at a nearby table had stopped eating and were openly watching the exchange. A server had paused in his duties, pretending to adjust napkins while listening to every word. Zara nodded slowly, her mind working through her options. She could leave quietly, avoiding a scene and preserving everyone's dignity. She could demand to speak to the general manager or owner. She could threaten legal action. Or she could do something else entirely. I understand, she said finally. You're absolutely right that you have the right to refuse service. That's well within your legal authority. Robert looked relieved, clearly expecting her to leave without further incident. However, Zara continued, her voice still calm but carrying a new undertone of authority. I'm curious about something. Do you happen to know who owns Le Chateau? Robert's expression shifted slightly. The restaurant is owned by Blackwell Chin Restaurant Group. Blackwell Chin, Zara repeated thoughtfully. Interesting name. Tell me, Robert, what do you know about the Blackwell family's involvement in the company? For the first time, Robert looked uncertain. The Blackwell family are silent partners. They don't involve themselves in day-to-day operations. Zara smiled, and something about that smile made Robert take a small step backward. Silent partners. How would you describe their level of ownership? I believe they hold minority stake, Robert said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. Actually, Zara said, pulling out her phone again, they hold 51%. Controlling interest, you might say. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she was looking for. In fact, the Blackwell family has been the majority owner of this restaurant group for over 15 years. The color was beginning to drain from Robert's face. Madison looked confused, glancing between Robert and Zara as if trying to understand what was happening. Zara held up her phone. I think there might be someone you'd like to speak with. My father, Marcus Blackwell, is the founder and CEO of Blackwell Chin Restaurant Group. He's also, coincidentally, the person who hired you. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert's mouth opened and closed without sound, like a fish gasping for air. Madison's eyes went wide, and several nearby diners who had been listening leaned forward in their chairs. Now, Zara continued, her voice still perfectly calm, I'm going to call my father and let him know about the excellent customer service I've experienced here tonight. I'm sure he'll be very interested to hear how his management team handles reservations. Robert found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Ms. Blackwell, there's been a misunderstanding. Has there? Zara asked, tilting her head slightly, because it seemed quite clear to me. You assessed that I wouldn't be comfortable in your environment and suggested I find somewhere more suitable. I'm curious what criteria you used to make that assessment. It wasn't. Robert was visibly sweating now. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. Zara looked around the dining room, noticing that their conversation had attracted the attention of nearly every table within earshot. Some diners were recorded with their phones. Others were whispering to their companions. And the entire atmosphere of the restaurant had shifted from refined elegance to electric tension. Tell you what, Zara said, putting her phone away. Let's try this again. I have a reservation under Blackwell for 7:30. I'd like to be seated at my table now, please. Robert nodded frantically. Of course, Ms. Blackwell. Right away. Madison, please escort Ms. Blackwell to her table immediately. Madison grabbed a menu and practically ran toward the dining room, with Robert following close behind and Zara walking calmly after them. The entire restaurant watched the procession as they made their way to a prime table by the window, exactly as Zara had requested 3 weeks ago. As they reached the table, Robert was falling over himself to apologize. Ms. Blackwell, please accept our sincerest apologies for confusion. Your server will be with you momentarily, and of course, dinner tonight is complimentary. Zara sat down and adjusted her napkin in her lap. Robert, I want to be very clear about something. I don't want dinner to be complimentary because of who my father is. I want to pay for my meal just like any other customer. What I want is to be treated with the same respect you would show to anyone else who walks through that door. Robert nodded eagerly. Absolutely, Ms. Blackwell. Of course. And Robert. Zara looked up at him with those calm, steady eyes. The confusion wasn't about my reservation, was it? Robert's face went red. No, ma'am. It wasn't. I'm glad we can be honest about that. Now, I'm going to enjoy my dinner, and you're going to think very carefully about how you treat customers in the future. Do we understand each other? Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. As Robert and Madison retreated, Zara could feel the eyes of the entire restaurant on her. Some diners looked embarrassed, others impressed, and a few seemed to be taking photos or videos of her sitting at her table. She knew that by tomorrow morning, this story would probably be all over social media. Her server appeared almost instantly, a young man named David who looked nervous but professional. Good evening, Dr. Blackwell. I'm David, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with something to drink? Dr. Blackwell? Zara asked with a slight smile. Word travels fast. David blushed. Robert mentioned that you're a surgeon. I just wanted to say thank you for what you do. My little sister had heart surgery last year, and doctors like you save her life. Zara's entire demeanor softened. What's your sister's name? Emma. She's 8 now, completely healthy. I'm so glad to hear that. David. Heart surgery can be scary for families, but children are incredibly resilient. As David took her drink order and left, Zara reflected on the strange turn the evening had taken. She had come here to celebrate her promotion, to enjoy a quiet dinner and savor her success. Instead, she had been forced to reveal her family connections just to get the basic respect that should have been automatic. Throughout dinner, she noticed a changed atmosphere in the restaurant. Staff members who had been indifferent or hostile now went out of their way to be accommodating. Other diners occasionally glanced her way, some with obvious curiosity, others with what looked like respect or admiration. The food was excellent, as she had expected, but the experience had been overshadowed by the confrontation at the hostess stand. As she was finishing her dessert, an older woman approached her table. She was well-dressed, probably in her 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes. "Excuse me," the woman said quietly. "I hope you don't mind the interruption, but I wanted to thank you for what you did tonight." Zara looked up, confused. "I'm not sure what you mean." The woman glanced around, then leaned slightly closer. "My granddaughter is mixed race, and she's been saving money to bring her boyfriend here for his birthday. After what I witnessed tonight, I was going to suggest they go somewhere else. But watching how you handled that situation, you showed grace and strength in a way that changed my mind. You made this place better just by being here." Zara felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the wine she'd been drinking. "Thank you for saying that. That means more to me than you know." "You're a doctor, aren't you?" the woman asked. "Pediatric cardiac surgeon." The woman's face lit up. "How wonderful. The world needs more people like you. People who heal and who stand up for what's right." After the woman returned to her table, Zara sat in quiet reflection. She thought about all the times she'd faced similar situations throughout her life. The skeptical looks when she walked into medical conferences, the surprise when colleagues learned about her credentials, the constant need to prove herself in ways that her white colleagues never had to consider. When David brought her check, she was surprised to see that Robert had added a handwritten note. "Dr. Blackwell, please accept our most sincere apologies for tonight's incident. We are reviewing our staff training procedures to ensure this never happens again. Your experience does not reflect the values of Le Chateau or Blackwell Chin Restaurant Group." Zara left a generous tip for David and walked toward the exit. As she passed the hostess stand, she noticed that Madison was no longer there. Robert stood nearby, looking like a man who knew his job was in jeopardy. "Ms. Blackwell," he said as she approached. "Again, I cannot apologize enough for tonight." Zara stopped and looked at him thoughtfully. "Robert, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you looked at me tonight, what did you see?" Robert shifted uncomfortably. I'm not sure what you mean." "I think you do know what I mean. When I walked through that door, you made assumptions about who I was and whether I belonged here. I want you to think about those assumptions and ask yourself where they came from." Robert nodded, his face flushed with embarrassment. "You're right. I was wrong, and there's no excuse for it." "You're right. There is an excuse. But there is an opportunity to do better. Every person who walks through that door deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of what you think you know about them based on their appearance. That's not just good customer service. It's basic human decency." "I understand. It won't happen again." Zara studied his face, trying to determine whether his remorse was genuine or simply fear for his job. "I hope that's true, Robert, because if it does happen again, it won't just be my father you'll be answering to." As she walked out into the cool October air, Zara's phone buzzed with a text message from her father. "Heard you had an interesting evening at Le Chateau. Call me tomorrow. We need to talk about some policy changes." Zara smiled, knowing that by tomorrow, every restaurant in the Blackwell Chin Group will be conducting mandatory sensitivity training for their staff. Change was slow, but it was possible when people were willing to speak up and demand better. 3 days later, Zara received a LinkedIn message from Madison, the hostess. "Dr. Blackwell, I wanted to reach out to apologize for my behavior the other night. I've been doing a lot of thinking since then, and I realized that I let my own unconscious biases affect how I treated you. I've enrolled in some diversity and inclusion training courses, and I'm working to become a better person. Thank you for handling the situation with such grace. You taught me something important about respect and assumptions." 2 weeks after that, David, her server, sent her a photo of his little sister Emma at her 8-year-old birthday party. Healthy and happy. The caption read, "Dr. Blackwell, Emma wanted to thank you again for all that surgeons like you do. She says she wants to be a doctor when she grows up, just like you. But the message that meant the most came from a teenage girl named Jasmine, who had been dining at Le Chateau with her family that night. Dr. Blackwell, I was at the restaurant when everything happened. I'm 17, and I've been thinking about what I want to do with my life. Watching you stand up for yourself while staying calm and dignified showed me what real strength looks like. I've decided to apply to pre-med programs. Thank you for showing me what's possible. 6 months later, Dr. Zara Blackwell was featured on the cover of Chicago Medicine magazine as the youngest chief of pediatric surgery in the city's history. The article mentioned her groundbreaking surgical techniques, her commitment to treating patients regardless of their ability to pay, and her advocacy for diversity in medicine. It also mentioned, briefly, an incident at a local restaurant that had sparked conversations about unconscious bias in service industries throughout the city. But for Zara, the real victory wasn't the magazine cover or the promotion or even the policy changes at her father's restaurants. The real victory was in the messages from young people who had seen her that night and decided that they, too, could demand respect, could pursue their dreams, and could change the world simply by refusing to accept less than they deserved. The article ended with a quote from Dr. Blackwell that became widely shared on social media. Respect isn't something you earn through your title, your wealth, or your connections. Respect is something every human being deserves simply by virtue of being human. When we forget that, we diminish not just others, but ourselves. And in restaurants, hospitals, schools, and offices throughout the city, people began to remember what respect really meant. Not because they were forced to, but because they had seen what dignity looked like when it refused to be diminished. The young woman who had walked into Le Chateau that October evening had wanted nothing more than a quiet celebration of her professional success. Instead, she had reminded an entire city that true power isn't about controlling others. It's about respecting humanity in everyone you meet. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not with anger or aggression, but with calm determination and the quiet insistence that everyone deserves to be treated as if they matter, because they do.